So welcome everyone to the MCLA Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice. This is a part of a global initiative by Bard College. So today, universities and institutions, faith groups, and community groups from across the world are holding teach-ins in their communities, at their colleges, their schools, about topics on climate and justice. So we have a really amazing lineup of panelists and presenters today, so we're very excited to share all of the information they have with you. Before we really roll into things, we're going to start by playing this video that gives a bit of an introduction to the event as a whole.
Welcome to the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice.
Bienvenue à la conférence mondiale éducative sur le climat et la justice.
Bem-vindo ao encontro participativo global sobre clima e justiça.
Today, we are coming together globally to share our concern for the climate crisis, for climate justice, and to find solutions. We understand that carbon pollution is causing the planet to heat up. We see the fires and floods, the droughts and crop failures. This teach-in will help us all move from despair about this to determination together to change the future. Why climate and justice? Global warming is profoundly unjust. People in low-income communities are already suffering the most as the planet heats up. In the last year, tens of millions of people have been forced to leave their homes by climate change, more refugees than from conflict and violence combined. We can stop this. We can stabilize the climate, and in doing so, create jobs and opportunities for all in a new green economy. What will it take? Our hard work and the courage to face it.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolina.
From the UK's wettest February on record to raging wildfires in California.
These winds die down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as Earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion, keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people. I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives, because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and lift others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
To make climate a class.
To make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
All right, so as I said before, welcome everyone. We're very excited to have you all here, both presenters and moderators and audience participants. Just so everyone knows, we have an in-person audience here on campus, and we also have people joining us virtually, both MCLA community members and faculty members, and also members of other communities. So this event, like the teach-in video mentioned, is intended to be an interdisciplinary dialogue on issues surrounding climate and justice. So essentially, this event at MCLA is split up into 4 different panels, and all of these panels address climate change from different lenses. So we have one panel that focuses on climate change, nature, and art. We have another panel that focuses more on STEM topics like energy, economics, things like that. So I hope you enjoy all of these different angles that we've been able to bring for you today. Just an acknowledgement, this event is sponsored by Biodiversity for Livable Climate. It's an organization that I work for, and it's also sponsored by the MCLA Campus Sustainability Committee. This event was organized by a student group of interns and volunteers from the Campus Sustainability Committee. So I just want to give kind of an overview of what the event format will be, just so everybody knows. So like I mentioned, this is split up into 4 different panels. Panelists will be joining both in person and virtually, so we'll be switching between screens. So essentially the way it's going to work is when the first panel comes up, 4 people, some people will be virtual, will be at this table. There will be a moderator. They'll introduce the first speaker. The speaker will give their presentation. After each speaker has either presented in person or virtually, we'll open it up for a Q&A. The way that Q&A is going to work is we're about to put a link in the Teams chat to an app called Slido. You don't need to download anything. You don't need to sign up for anything. Once you click on the link, it'll bring you right to the page, and you can submit questions there in live time. You can also click on the Slido button in Teams and submit your questions there, and we'll see them here in person. For audience members joining us in person, all of you have QR codes on your seats along with your event programs. If you scan that code with your phone, you'll be brought to that same link that I mentioned, and you can submit questions to any of the speakers or moderators in live time, and we'll try to get to all of them if we can during the Q&A session. That's about it for event logistics. We have, for in-person participants, lots of food in the back of the room. Please help yourself. We also have lots of books that you can borrow on various topics related to climate and justice. There's a sign-up sheet back there to sign up for them. And lastly, for people joining us in person, in the back left corner of the room, you'll see vision boards on the wall. These vision boards were created by MCLA students as a part of an ongoing campaign for Earth Day called A Hopeful Vision. And essentially, the purpose of these vision boards is to create an installation on the MCLA campus of artwork that represents students' reasons for hope for climate change. So some of these vision boards are regeneration focused or renewable energy focused. They're very inspiring, so if you'd like to take a look at some point during the event, you are very welcome to and encouraged to. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Phil Anderson. He's one of the teach-in student organizers, an intern with the Campus Sustainability Committee, and he's going to talk a little bit about MCLA's upcoming Earth Day event, and then he'll be starting off with the first panel.
Hi everyone, excuse me. I'm Phil Anderson. I am a junior here at MCLA. I am on the Sustainability Committee. I'm also majoring in environmental studies. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you guys about an event we have coming up in the next few weeks. It's going to be a week-long Earth Week celebration. We have been partnering with local businesses and clubs and organizations here on campus to, to give you guys we're going to have events throughout the week, essentially. For example, with North Adams Yoga, we are going to have a yoga event on Tuesday at noon in the quad. Anyone is welcome to participate. On Thursday, there's going to be an expo of local businesses and how they use sustainable practices. We're even having some people from OBV come out from Boston, hopefully. Just wanted to let you guys know about that, kind of spread awareness of it, and get you guys excited. Without further ado, though, I would like to invite the speakers on the Climate and Socie-city panel to come up. Professor Junad, Professor Huang, and Professor Edgerton. Well, actually, Professor Edgerton is remote. Yeah. Alrighty. So our first speaker is Mohammed Junaid. He's an assistant professor of anthropology here at MCLA. He has done research at Graduate Center at SUNY with violent youth activists and political subjectivity in Kashmir. His book project, The Rebel Dreams, focused on post-colonial empire and political subjectivity in Kashmir. It's a historical and ethnographic account, of aspiration of freedom and the political movement against the occupation of Indian-controlled Kashmir. You want to pull up your...
Yeah, I don't know where it is.
Do you know what the name of the USB is? Oh.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. I want to thank Phil for the introduction and Abby for moving introduction to the panels that are going to come up. Thank you for inviting me. So I was expecting not to be the first speaker, but since I am, I'll try to do justice to this role. My topic is not home in the world. It's part of what I was assigned to do, talking about mourning and then organize. Also want to say I speak about this topic because I teach a course which was called Environmental Anthropology. But I changed the topic to eco-disaster and cultural imagination for the fall semester that I'm teaching it, recognizing that the environment that we were talking about no longer exists or may no longer exist in near future. I'll start with an ethnographic note. This is a picture that I took from my apartment in Srinagar in Kashmir in the foothills of Himalayas on September 3, 2014. A few days of rain, everything was green. This is an upper class neighborhood, as perhaps you can tell from the houses. The city was calm. Nobody expected anything. The next day, September 4, 2014, everyone was speechless. The neighborhood had turned into a terrifying lake. I immediately thought of how to describe what had just happened. The water had reached 22 feet, almost to the third level that I was living on, along with a couple of my friends. People from downstairs had moved up. And I could only think of a term that Sigmund Freud used many years ago at the turn of the century, uncanny. He used the term, in German, he used the term das Unheimliche or heimlich, which meant unhomely, not at home or feeling not at home in the world. That's how it felt. The city no longer felt like a city that people had known. It had become a terrifying monster for a large number of people. Freud had defined uncanny as in reality nothing new or alien, but something which is familiar and old established in the mind, and which has become alienated from it only through the process of repression. That it was not new, this flood, or at least the auguring of the flood or the expectation of the flood was not new. This area that people had built up on used to be a floodplain many years ago. The pressures of modernity, of urbanization and military occupation that Kashmir is under, where military has taken over large portions of the land, had pushed people to build on this floodplain. People had just forgotten. They had repressed the idea that the river, of which it was a floodplain, would one day come back and reclaim it. And it came back with a vengeance. The events of that day in a small corner of the world drove me to look at the question of why do humans tend to look away? Why do we avert our gaze? Environmental activist Naomi Klein has argued, she used the term cognitive dissonance. She says that the crisis we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face, yet we are doubling down on the stuff that is causing the crisis in the first place. Indian thinker and writer Amitav Ghosh, in his book The Great Derangement, uses the term unthinkable. He says that the extreme nature of today's climate events, these events like what happened in Kashmir, freakish tornadoes and 100-year storms, make them peculiarly resistant to contemporary modes of thinking and imagining. Frederick Jameson, great literary critic, uses the phrase crisis of imagination. He says that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Mark Fisher, who recently passed away, a great thinker from Britain, he looked at Hollywood films to show that you would hardly find any Hollywood film that shows society without capitalism. But you would see a lot of films that show apocalypse, that show the aftermath of the apocalypse, the world has ended. Uncanny is strange, it's mysterious, and it's unsettling. Over the last couple of years, I looked over newspaper headlines. They are staring it in our faces, yet they escape our attention. Even with a cursory look, these are some of the things that I was able to find. That carbon dioxide levels have risen, are now higher than the last 800,000 years. In the last 60 years alone, CO2 has increased 100 times faster than the previous increases. The Arctic is warming 4 times as fast as the rest. Siberia, some of the coldest places are in Siberia, their summers now look like tropical summers. It also says that 3/4 of the new diseases that are emerging, most of them are zoonotic diseases, and have possibly no cure, now originate in non-human animals that we were previously not in contact with. In New York City, and this was quite fascinating to me. This is where I lived for a bunch of years. The birds seemed hungrier and bolder when the COVID struck. They were like coyotes roaming around in the streets. And the report ended with, what is good for wildlife has been catastrophic for humans. What I want to explore really is the implication of these sentences. If you look at these charts even, and look where we are right now, and think about why the previous high was around 360,000 years ago. That's like before we became humans as a species. We emerged as a species between 300 to 200,000 years. We only left Africa 70,000 years ago. We have never been as a species in a world that has so much carbon in air, right? And if you look at this other graph, this graph is quite telling. Not only because it shows how starting 1750, the birth of Industrial Revolution, the atmospheric carbon CO2 has systematically grown, especially since the end of the Second World War. But also, if you look up here, this corner, it shows that in 2020, even when the CO2 emissions actually dropped because we stayed home a lot, atmospheric CO2 continued to rise because we may have actually crossed the tipping point where things have become a cascade. And this story just came a couple of days ago, this graph that for the first time at the temperatures, the average daily temperature in Antarctica, where it is almost the end of the summertime now, the temperatures were 70 degrees higher than usual. This information can lead to despair. right? A sense of futility and purposelessness. A lot of people go through that. It could lead to apathy, sensory blockade that we're not seeing it, that no moral qualms. It could lead to pathology. A lot of people think that perhaps, some solution might come out of chaos. This is a nihilistic vision of the world. The costs are enormous, but it could also lead to indignation. Indignation is the first step to a call to action. But to move from indignation to an actual plan, to an actual call to action, what is needed is to understanding the source of the problem. We have to move away from the disinformation, deflection, and co-optation of transformative language that is used to maintain status quo. Oil companies changing their logos, water bottles emerging out of green plants. All of this begins by recognition of the interconnected history of the global processes that have shaped the world. For instance, why are cities under threat? Which cities are under threat? Most of the cities, from Mumbai to Calcutta to Karachi to Lagos, Boston and New York and Miami, these are under threat because they were created by colonialists. These were cities developed to extract maximum amount from colonized regions and to take them back to the metropole. These were built thoughtlessly. That's why these cities are now under intense threat. Some scholars, like Paul Crutzen, a Nobel laureate, has used the term Anthropocene to talk about it. He says that Anthropocene is a human-dominated geological epoch, where human action is fundamentally transforming the planet. All of these things are happening that are listed up here. And we are actually making a large portion of the world what David Wallace Wells calls uninhabitable Earth. That a very small portion of the Earth in future will be livable, where humans can still exist. But the point is, is it Anthropocene? Is it all general human action? Humans have existed before this happened, or is it a certain logic of economy that is causing us to go where we are going right now? We have been told, for instance, that if you do these things, lifestyle changes, things will be better. Buy lithium-powered, battery-powered cars. How individual actions get these eating plant-based diet. To me, those are not solutions. For instance, if you look at these companies like Tesla, they are now stripping many new regions of the world, from Chile to Congo to many areas in Russia and China, of these rare earth metals. Plant-based diet also is causing rapid deforestation in many parts of the world as agriculture, forests are being stripped down to increase agricultural regions. We have to recognize that there's a clear link between the global GDP growth and carbon dioxide emission rates. It is not hidden. These sources are United Nations. These are sources from pro-capitalist publications like Economists. We now know, for instance, that close to 21% of the growth of emissions is caused by 1% of the population at the top. And while we were told that we will find solution within this logic of growth, that investments will cause governments to invest in clean energy, we know that that sentiment has completely gone down. That's graph from the Economist. The question, therefore, is, can the planet survive and sustain the growth that we have been in? I'm not going to go through all of this because of paucity of time, but all of these begin really around the time of Industrial Revolution and accelerate, what is called the Great Acceleration in the post-Second World War period. The stories are all around us. We have to recognize that the history of capitalism has always been the history of organizing nature. And therefore now, the climate action is a social justice action. One cannot separate climate from what is going on in the sphere of social inequalities. There is no such thing as a natural disaster. Everything is a social calculus. Disasters, as great geographer Neil Smith once pointed out, are products of social inequalities. We have to also recognize that it's not just humans who are suffering. Our non-human species, who also belong to the earth, have suffered. They've lost enormous, there's a habitat loss. Every year, close to 30,000 species go extinct. That is a huge loss to global biodiversity. And we have to organize ourselves, locate ourselves not simply as humans, but as members of a larger community of species who together belong to the earth. And not just for cute animals, I just put this up here, but also for everyone, because all the links in the chain of life are important and crucial. I just want to end quickly by saying that in 2014, during the flood, there was a little calf that floated down by our house, and we pulled him out of the water, revived him, and fed him leaves that were floating down and things that we could find. What I wanted to end by is that we need to recognize that now we have to know that many species are dependent on us. We have to recognize we may be dependent on them because we use them for extraction. We shouldn't, but they are also dependent on us. And we have to find ways that other than logics of growth, based on which we can build a lateral rather than a sort of a hierarchical relationship with nature. So I'll just end here. Thank you so much. I hope this conference opens up many new ways of thinking about the solutions as well. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Professor Huang, who's going to be speaking more on city spaces and how they're affected by climate change. Professor Huang is an assistant professor of interdisciplinary studies here at MCLA. His research focuses more on the intersection of race and urban development. Specifically, he investigates the formation of Blackness in contemporary China with the context of post-socialist urban growth.
Does this clicker still work?
Yes.
Okay. Oops. Which one do I go to the next slide? This one? Oh, this one. Okay. All right. Cool. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming to this wonderful conference. First, a disclaimer. I'm not really an expert in sustainable urban development, so my knowledge on the impact of climate change on cities is really limited. But when the organizers approached me and said, we'll need a 5 to 10 minute talk, I was like, okay, I think I have enough to fool enough people. So I'm really, really reaching to anything I know. But obviously, cities, climate change had a huge impact on cities, especially by heat and flooding. I think Professor Janat already talked a little bit about how flooding can change cities, and I'll talk a little bit more about heat and flooding, how they can affect cities. Cities are particularly susceptible to overheating, just because of the amount of pavement and the lack of green spaces in them. So if we think about currently, if we look around the world, all major cities in the world, they look very similar, especially the central business districts, right? They all have high rises of 30, 40 stories, and they all have glass walls. And, those buildings look really cool, ultra modern. It's very inspiring. If we think about that, song, the Empire State of Mind, with Jay-Z and, his singing, or Alicia Keys, and then she's saying, the concrete jungle is where dreams are made of, right? So we feel really proud of, city skylines. But actually, those cities with glass walls, they're extremely energy inefficient. Glass walls, hemorrhage heats in the winter, and the AC in the summer as well. But more than that, they also reflect heat onto the pavement, which absorb all the heat. So this is an image I got from The Guardian in New Delhi. You can see the pavement is actually melting. So that's how hot the pavement can get. And there's a term called the heat island effect on cities because of the pavement absorbing all the heat, the concrete. So cities tend to be a few degrees higher than the surrounding environments. But now with climate change, that effect on cities will only get worse and worse if we unless we do something about it, right? And we also have to recognize that overheating on urban space would have completely different effects on different racial groups. And if you look at this map, this is the Richmond, Virginia heat map. You can see that, is it the laser? Okay. You can see that the city central area is actually a lot more orange compared to the surrounding areas. So the suburban areas, those who are familiar with urban history in the U.S. know that, the suburban areas are mostly occupied by white residents, right? Whereas racial minorities are more likely to concentrate in the urban areas. And the suburban areas are, they have more green space, more trees, yards, right? So they would be lower in temperature compared to urban areas. So for racial minorities, especially African Americans, they will bear the brunt of overheating of urban space, right? And of course, this will be even more taxing on their expenses on medical expense as well, right? So the impact on racial minorities would be, it's a double, triple whammy for racial minorities. Another thing is, flooding. Actually, over spring break, I went to Philadelphia, and I was sort of helping my friend check out some apartments because they're moving, and I checked out this apartment by the Schuylkill Canal. And we're trying to look for that leasing office, and we couldn't find it because the whole entire first floor of that housing complex was being renovated. We thought they were being renovated. And then eventually we found the leasing office, and we talked to the manager, and they're saying, actually, the year before, Philadelphia just experienced the worst flood in 150 years. That entire island in Schuylkill River Canal was flooded. The whole first floor of that entire housing complex was flooded. And so all of the buildings on that island and the surrounding area, they're all under reconstruction because of the flood. So, as the temperature rises, when these cities are being, or they're by coastal areas, they'll be more susceptible to flooding, right? So we need to think about how cities should prepare for climate change, and cities should do more to prepare for climate change because again, racial minorities, urban poor, they are the ones that would be bearing the brunt of climate change. So there are different things that cities are doing, although there should be more cities doing those things. So, for example, there are multiple ways to reduce the heating. You can look at this in Singapore. You can see the building. They have the green walls to absorb the heat. In Chicago, they have rooftop farming. This green spaces in city would reduce the heat, right? And also you can have water retaining pavements, which will actually retain some water. So when the water evaporates, it actually emits heat so that the pavement will be less hot. So this is actually from a Japanese road construction association, and that's the water retaining pavements is being implemented in some U.S. cities as well. Of course, we also need to diversify our means of transportation. We have to really wean ourselves of car use. So many cities are trying to to build neighborhoods or areas that are more friendly toward other forms of transportation use. For example, this is Barcelona. And in 2014, they implemented something called super blocks. And so basically what they did was that they block off 9 square blocks for auto traffic, so that people can ride bikes can walk there. It also creates a more communal friendly environment as well. It gives people a chance to socialize, to hang out, and small businesses to thrive as well. So instead of thinking about, echo what Professor Janat just said, instead of thinking about driving Tesla, we need to think about other ways of other means of transportation. So I'll end right here. So hopefully this talk gives you some information to think about. So I'll leave it to the next presenter.
Our next presenter is going to be presenting on environmental justice. It is Professor Egerton. Professor Egerton, is professor emerita, I don't know how to pronounce that word, sorry, of interdisciplinary studies here at MCLA. She has taught courses like curriculum theory, the nature of human nature, introduction to cross-cultural and social justice studies, and environmental justice. She was a professor at the Education Department from 2004 to 2015 and director or co-director of the MCLA Honors Program from fall 2009 through spring 2018. Dr. Egerton has a bachelor's degree in chemistry, master's in organic chemistry, and doctorate in curriculum theory, with an emphasis on cultural studies. She retired in May 2021, but she continues to pursue her interest in the environment and social justice through reading and writing. She is currently preparing remarks for a keynote address at the American Association for the Advancement of Curriculum Studies, where the conference theme is Curriculum Studies in Anthropocene. She also signed on to contribute to Bill McKibben's movement for people over 60. Right now, I'd like to ask her if she could share her screen so we can put her presentation up there.
Oh, okay. I can also share it from here. What's the...
Because you're up on the main screen right now, you just need to share what your presentation is.
Okay. Oh. It changed. Okay, is this working?
Yep, that's working.
Okay. Let me get in the proper mode here. Come back. Okay, is this working?
Yep, that's working.
Okay. Let me get in the proper mode here. Come back. Okay. Well, I just want to say thanks. I'm happy to be invited to this teach-in, and I'm really grateful to Abby and others who organized this. So I've been watching these threats to our existence unfold over the past few decades, and I've been really frustrated by how little discussion there has been in colleges and universities, but that's starting to change. And this is evidence of one piece of evidence of that. So my remarks are really going to be basic and brief about the concept of environmental justice. So I'll be quick. Just a definition. It's a movement that aims to expose the inequitable distribution of environmental problems, who benefits from this distribution, who suffers most, how this happens, and what might be done to mitigate these injustices. And I think both Professors Junaid and Wang have already provided some examples of this concept. It's not the same thing as being a part of an environmental justice movement is not the same thing as being an environmentalist. And in fact, the movement originated as a response to the environmentalist movement because it fails oftentimes to consider the differentiated impacts of environmental degradation on members of historically marginalized groups. It's also different from just as social justice movements, which it responds to their failure to consider the impact of environmental problems on members of historically marginalized groups. Now, many people have set the origins of this environmental justice movement in the United States and in the early 1980s. So it's therefore a younger movement than either environmental movements or social justice movements in that sense, as something that has, caught a lot of attention. Originally, the environmental justice movement was focused on instances of environmental racism in the United States, but it has over the years expanded to include any groups that have been marginalized, and it has certainly moved beyond the borders of the United States to become a global movement. So it's not strictly about environmental racism now. This image that you see right here comes from Louisiana, a little town called Norco, where the residents live and play in the shadow of the Shell oil refinery. There's a lot of that in the southern part of Louisiana. This is around Lake Charles, Louisiana. And typically these plants are located, these refineries and also a lot of chemical plants in Louisiana on lands that have belonged to people of color. Something called the Cancer Alley or the Chemical Corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, for example, is an area that was very fertile agricultural land right along the Mississippi River. And it was land that people who had been enslaved first occupied after emancipation and built communities along there and were thriving until the oil companies, the oil refineries and chemical plants came and really just ruined the land. And they were able to do that in these parts because because the people who lived there didn't have the resources or the status to fight back. So it's an environmental justice and it's an environmental racism issue. But environmental justice or injustice is certainly a global issue. Some of what the prior speakers have addressed already are examples of that. But an example that I will point to because it's so egregious and it's been going on for so long now is the Niger Delta and the ways that the oil companies that have extracted from that land for 50 years have ruined it. And it turns out that polluting companies like that often choose poorer countries that are led by sometimes corrupt autocrats, because it's easier to deal with an autocratic leader than with a place where they have to deal with the people and where there is some measure of democracy. So people in these countries where this happens rarely reap the huge financial benefits that they might from selling these resources. Some call this the resource curse. Okay, my mouse quit working. There we go. So here's a picture of the Niger Delta before the oil companies moved in. And here are some images that are quite recent of what it looks like now. Residents can no longer grow crops on the land or fish in the water, and they are often ill, especially the children. Surely many have died from this toxic environment. It's basically a complete ecocide that, if the pollution were to end, it would still take decades to clean. So this is a teach-in about climate change. So let's then turn this idea of environmental justice to the climate. Climate justice refers to the fact that some people are affected earlier and or more catastrophically than others by the disasters and so on that happen because of rising temperatures. Those most affected tend to be those who have fewer choices about where they live. We've seen that a lot in the United States even, or those who live in more vulnerable nations. To add to that injury, the people who are most adversely affected in the world tend to be those who have done the least to contribute to the carbon in the atmosphere. The wealthy countries of the world can be said to owe a climate debt to many of the less wealthy countries. In the US, for example, we emitted more fossil carbon over time than any other country. We're not now emitting the most at present, but we're near the top still. And the point being, we contributed, though, through time more than anywhere else. And those carbon emissions, carbon dioxide in particular, remain in the atmosphere for some 100 years. But of course, our emissions do not only affect the United States, they affect the entire planet. Some nations are now having trouble growing crops because of drought. Some are seeing large sea level rise. You saw examples of flood in all these places. There've been events of where the temperature, heating, where everything heats up and people die from hyperthermia. Many of the people coming to our southern border, for example, from Central America, are, at least in part, climate refugees because of the drought, and there's accompanying starvation in those areas and lots of violence that comes along with that. And we're not treating these refugees very well in the United States. Indeed.
Hey, Professor, I'd hate to interrupt. I was just wondering if you could wrap it up for us, please.
I'm on my last line almost.
Awesome.
Indeed, we do not have an asylum claim for climate refugee. You know, people can come and claim that they are political refugees, they're fleeing political violence, such things as that. But they cannot make claims for asylum based on climate change yet. The other problem with thinking about climate justice is that it's an incredibly complicated situation. How do we divide up the world spatially? How do we divide up who owes what? And how do we take into consideration future generations? That is more impactful now than other issues of pollution in the past, because the existential threat of climate change is so much greater. So perhaps more than any other form of environmental degradation, this will profoundly affect future generations. And of course, as you've been seeing, it's already affecting present generations. It's just going to get worse. And future generations had no opportunity to consent to this. So it also poses a unique moral consideration. And I will wrap it up there, and thank you for listening.
All right. I'm going to open it up with a few questions for our panelists. But if you guys have come up with any questions, feel free to, in Teams, there should be a link to where you should ask the questions. And there's also QR codes on your seat. If you have any, just scan it and you can ask your questions there. All right. My first question is for Professor Junad. What do you feel is the best way to support people who are dealing with paralyzing climate emotions? What do you feel are hopeful solutions for climate change, like with your experience?
Thank you. I mean, of course, there are so many best minds in the world trying to solve that issue. As I don't know what I can contribute to that, but my sense is that we really need to think big about this, because this is not a small problem. This is a drastic change to the planet. As I said, this is not going to be the home that we grew up in, that we have lived in. So the solutions have also to be dramatic and drastic. I think what we need to do is to really think about whether we can continue to sustain the modern civilization as it is. And what we would need to do perhaps is, I think some of this goes back to what Professor Ettinger was talking about, who bears the responsibility for this. Like we can't, I don't think it is morally plausible for us to tell poor people in third world countries, within quotes, that, they must stop developing their countries, that they must stop alleviating poverty while maintaining our lifestyles here. I think that a solution has to be somehow midway, that we have to learn to live within the means that the earth can sustain. That would be the broadest possible sort of way to think about it.
I do have a follow-up on that, because I thought of something during your presentation that I thought was interesting. You said that, our individual changes, like going vegan, changing our diet, changing how we consume things, won't make a difference. Obviously you just kind of covered it a little bit, but what do you think we need to do as individuals to make the change if those things won't work?
Yeah, I want to say sorry that yes, individual actions are not enough. I'm not saying that they're going to make any difference, but they're not enough. We're often told that you bear the responsibility. We're told often that we will continue to strip the earth of its metals, destroy the forests, continue to produce things. You just need to switch from this to this. My sense is that there are no saviors in this consumerist capitalism that we're looking for, and just eating plant-based diet or buying a new Tesla car are not going to do that, because if we do have to make investments, we should precisely make investments, as Professor Gongji said, in public transportation, and learn to use public transportation, not build cities that go out of control. We have seen the effects of that. We need to perhaps reduce. I'm scared of what is called the infrastructure bill. Trillions of dollars are going to be used to build new infrastructure. Where is the material for all of that going to come from? It's going to be stripped out of the earth somewhere else. So we need to really carefully think about, in that bill, in that infrastructure bill, there was supposed to be a climate bill as well, which was going to be part of that, which has been now taken out. We are not really thinking about our priorities here.
All right. I have one thing for Professor Edgerton. Could you please stop your screen share for us?
Yeah.
And my next question is for Professor Huang. What do you think can be done specifically in the city of North Adams to promote more green spaces, like cities like Chicago have been doing, and the ones you've shown in your presentation?
Specifically, North Adams?
Yeah, North Adams. Do you have any ideas for that?
That's a tough question because we're already surrounded by all the beautiful scenery. I think one thing that North Adams can do is if we compare North Adams with European, say, towns of similar size, European towns are a lot more compact, a lot denser. So density actually means a lot more than just a lifestyle. So North Adams is actually very, very spread out. So when cities are spread out, that means people drive, right? And when people drive, the main street will feel really, really small. You drive past it in 5 seconds. So it's not good for the local community. It's not good for the environment because we're so used to driving. And North Adams was not always like that. Before urban renewal in the 50s and 70s, North Adams had a very vibrant, Main Street community. But because, North Adams, as part of the U.S., decided to switch to automobile. So cities we gradually got rid of the idea that cities or streets are for pedestrians, streets are for people. We redefine street to be space for cars. So I think one thing North Adams can do is to find ways to rebuild the Main Street area, make the town denser. That's, I think, and then it'll be more friendlier toward other means of transportation.
Right. I have one last question for Professor Edgerton. How can individuals from non-environmental justice communities support communities that are affected by disproportionate environmental hazards?
Well, that's a really broad question. It would be hard to answer about in general, but in specific cases, there are, I think this is similar. The response to this is similar to what Professor Junaid was saying, that we don't change things by getting a Tesla or being vegan or so forth on a sufficient level. I believe we have to join organizations that can put political pressure on the people who are in a position to change policies about these things. That our politicians will not act unless they have sufficient pressure put on them. So I think that's a really important part of it. That may be the most important part that I can think of right now. And I do think that our own lifestyle changes are at least symbolically significant, that you show other people how one can live differently, because we are going to have to learn how to live differently if we adapt to what the damages that we've already done and the damages that we continue to do. Our lives are going to be very different from what they are now. So I think there is value in starting to try to change those ways you live, the ways you consume, your attitude about consuming even. But primarily get involved politically. There are a number of organizations, like I think Bill McKibben's organizations have done a lot of good, the 350.org, but there are just a lot of things that you can do in that realm. I think that's the best answer I can offer right now.
Alrighty. Thank you very much. I would like to thank our professors our presenters, excuse me, one more time with a round of applause. Thank you for presenting. I would like to invite Jack Wolf up next.
All right, thanks, Phil. My name is Jack, and I'll be moderating the Climate Solutions panel. We'll be talking about energy, agriculture, and forests. Pleased to have Professor Nancy Ovitsky, Garrett Colvin, and Laura Bentz here to talk with us. Nancy is speaking first. She's a professor in the Department of Business, Administration, and Economics at MCLA, and has served as a faculty member of that department for almost 35 years, including 10 years as chair from 2000 to 2009. She's been active on many committees and initiatives both on and off campus, and has directed the department's MBA program since its inception in 2010. She earned her PhD at the University of Illinois. Nancy has been a member of Berkshire BPW for over 20 years and was first introduced to BPW as a child when her aunt, Jean McCary, was the organization's national president. She has been a resident of Pittsfield since 1980, where she helps her 2 sons and daughters-in-law raise her 6 grandchildren. I'll pass it over to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Jack. I will be sharing my screen. You guys let me know, since you've already seen me fail doing this well in class, if you actually initially, I'm just going to share my screen and then go to the PowerPoint. Let's see. All right, are you seeing my slides?
Yes, we can see him, Nancy.
Okay, great. So I had, a couple of you are in my environmental economics class, and part of what I said I would share was, some of the personal individual actions that I am trying to take. As Mohammed mentioned, these help, but they certainly aren't enough. The economists look for, how do we figure out ways to cover all the social costs of environmental damage that don't get covered by the producers, the consumers, government. But one way is individual action. So this is kind of my most recent individual action, which is far more significant than some of the minor things I've been doing for years, wondering if they do any good. As things as small as peeling the paper wrapper off a can, since I still have to separate my recycling. I don't have a single source here in Pittsfield, and you always wonder, does that do any good? But this is my attempt to walk the walk and make some investments in reducing fossil fuel. A little background, my house is 100 years old this year. 40 of those years I have lived here with my family. The heat source is natural gas with steam heat. And I apologize for those of you in my class, if you have to do a PowerPoint presentation, I would probably tell you you've got too much text on your slide, but I didn't have time to separate the notes from the PowerPoint, from the bullet points. So the heat source is natural gas with steam heat. The Berkshire Gas replaced all of the pipes under the street a couple of years ago, so at least we know that those are no longer the 90-year-old pipes through which the gas flows. The furnace was very old. It was I don't know what era, but it had been powered by coal, and I could tell this from the coal chute windows in the basement. I grew up watching the coal truck in my farmhouse in Illinois, watching the coal truck come into and dump the coal into the basement. And I spent a lot of time shoveling coal into the furnace. So I certainly recognized that. It was then switched to oil. The oil delivery pipe was still there, and then by city natural gas. The furnace itself, to keep from the heat being wasted coming off of it, was encased in asbestos, as were many of the pipes. 30 years ago, we added an addition. Rather than try to the house, with steam heat, we didn't want the new addition to be steam heat. We wanted hot water baseboard heaters. So we now have 2 furnaces. So put in a new natural gas furnace. Shortly thereafter, the steam furnace needed to be replaced, and the asbestos on the furnace and the pipes were removed. And if you want to know what MCLA grads do after graduation, the 2 young men that did that work were sociology majors. The first zone natural gas furnace had to be replaced again about 6 years ago. The steam furnace is still going strong. Climate change really, in the Berkshires, really led me to investigating this and making a substantial investment in moving off of fossil fuel. Many summers in the past, I didn't need any AC. But recently, more recent summers, we've had more and more hot summers, more and more hot days. And with no forced air HVAC system in place, I've had to use window ACs. I had finally decided I've had it with wrestling window ACs. Someone mentioned mini split units being powered by heat pumps for air conditioning. Then I learned they could be used for both heating and cooling, so I started to investigate this possibility. The solar panels, I had considered those before. I don't have the best exposure. I have a west exposure instead of a south exposure. And my electricity use is pretty minimal. I mean, my average bill, except for the couple of months in the summer, is about $75. So the cost-benefit analysis didn't pass muster. But if I was going to now start relying on electricity for heating and cooling, it finally made sense to invest in solar. I have a former student who runs New England Solar and Plus Green, and he did an installation for another house in the family a number of years ago. They've been very pleased with the system and the payback time, so I called him, got a quote, just about fell over. $28,800. You'll notice the background on my slides is the picture of my house with the solar panel. I have 24 panels. That was recommended in order to have enough coverage with my less than ideal exposure to the sun. Federal tax credits right now, 26%. The max Massachusetts is 1,000. So it ended up costing me about $20,000. Estimated payback period is 15 years. I'll be real old at that point, hopefully still able to be in this house. But that didn't factor in the switch to using the heat pump. And if you want more information on that, if Abby has a way of sharing these slides, that link is a useful link. Life with solar. First had to be approved by Eversource. They only allow so many households to be in particular geographic areas. Panels were activated January 13th. I applied for the SREC credits. That certification still hasn't been approved. But my balance with Eversource is they owe me $47. So once these SREC credits are approved, I will get quarterly reimbursements for my power that's going to the grid. Next step is the heat pump and the mini splits. This will happen in May. I said wait until the end of the semester. I'm too busy until then. That's about $16,000. Mini splits are used in homes with no original ductwork. If I had a hot air system with ducts, I could do a whole house conversion. It's just too difficult to put ductwork into a 100-year-old house. Will I get a rebate on the heat pump? I was certainly hoping so. Last fall, when I was thinking of this, Mass was talking, we're finally going to extend the rebates to residents with natural gas heating systems, which had not been approved for these before. But it turns out I needed to do a whole house and completely replace the gas system or do integrated controls with the gas system. Integrated controls was going to cost more than the rebate, so I didn't go down that. And just an FYI, I'm getting an air source heat pump as opposed to ground source, which is your geothermal. Ground source are more efficient. They cost more to install. I also didn't think we had the installer didn't think I had the ground space to do that.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thanks for sharing your experience with your house. We're going to move to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Laura Bentz. Laura is the grandchild of Kansas wheat farmers and does not remember a single time in her life when she suffered from plant blindness. She may not have known what the names of the plants, but was always aware that there were plants around, and that the plants changed quite a lot as her family traveled between Kansas and Western Oregon, where she was raised. Pass it over to you, Laura.
And now I'm lucky enough to live in the Berkshires, where plants have changed yet again. And Abby's going to put my slides up. And I'm not sure what the second speaker was going to say, but when Professor Vitsky was talking about solar panels, I was thinking, well, I am actually talking about solar energy as well, because plants are these amazing species that humans really depend on, even though we don't like to think about it. And they're being brought to us by solar energy. Plants have that amazing ability to take solar energy and make it into their own food. And wouldn't it be great if we could do that? But we can't. And are you guys? Yep, that's me. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how slowing down and looking to natural landscapes, working with native plants, can help us overcome some of the despair that many of us are feeling in the face of climate change. And we can help the pollinators that we also need to help plants make seeds, many seeds that we eat, and to keep propagating plants. So Albert Einstein had a great observation. Let's look deeply into nature, and then we'll understand everything better. So I really wanted to emphasize that except for in the melting concrete of New Delhi, plants grow everywhere. They grow right now, up until now. Things are changing quickly, but plants grow in the tundra, plants grow on steep mountainsides in California, plants grow in the Midwest, plants grow in the dry desert of Arizona, which has got to be the complete polar opposite of us here in the Berkshires. Plants grow in the Sahara. Plants grow way north of the Arctic Circle in Alaska. Plants grow on the high mountains in the Rockies and the Cascades where I grew up. This is research being done in the Mount St. Helens area after the explosions in 1980 and the plants recolonized. Plants grow by the seaside in the sand and salty, sandy soil where we often think that plants won't grow. But we can look to these natural environments to look to things we can plant along salty roadsides in New England. Plants grow in the vast grasslands of North America and Central Europe. Plants grow on mountaintops in New Hampshire and way down East Maine. These plants can be beautiful in our home gardens even in the winter. And there are lots of amazing plants growing right here in Berkshire County in super challenging environments. These are plants growing in Bartholomew Cobble in South Berkshire County on top of rocks. And we can learn from these plants and grow them in other places. Plants grow in many kinds of habitats and many habitats that are considered difficult. But we can learn from this and we can match plants to existing conditions in our home gardens. And doing this can make gardening easier, more satisfying, and there can be benefits to other creatures with whom we are still sharing the planet. There are a lot of plants growing here in the Berkshires that we can invite into our home environments, as opposed to the grasses and ornamental flowers that need so many fossil fuel inputs. These pictures are all in natural environments here in Berkshire County, taken in the months of April and May. And if you have a wet spot in your yard, these are things that you can grow that won't need fertilizer and pesticides and will benefit the bees. And hummingbirds use the fuzz from this unfurling fiddlehead to line their nests. We can take lessons from all these natural landscapes and plant these things around our homes instead of grass, which causes a lot of environmental problems that, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over for the moment. I'm also trying to inspire you, not talk more about problems. A lot of people don't want to garden because we have so many deer here, which are a result of suburbanization. But there are so many resources, and you shouldn't let your fear of deer stop you from gardening. I'm not expecting anyone to memorize this list at this very moment, but this is to show that there are things that you can grow that will benefit the bees and the birds that the deer won't eat. If you are worried about ticks, one of the best things you can do is get rid of non-native invasive plants. For example, Japanese barberry. This man led research at Yukon stores, and they were able to document that the more Japanese barberry growing in an environment, the more ticks per acre. So removing Japanese barberry from your yard can make your yard a lot safer from the viewpoint of ticks. There's in my mind, there's a connection between this slide, which was taken at the Spruces, the former mobile home park, which is now a FEMA site, just over the line. It's technically in Williamstown along Route 2 on the north side of Route 2, just after you leave North Adams. This was a mobile home park that flooded in Hurricane Irene in 2011, and now it's a FEMA site. No one is allowed to live there anymore because of the danger of future flooding. And this was a grassy area, not unlike some grass that I walked across coming to this building. And a group of people in Williamstown who were concerned about pollinator decline over the course of, this will be the fourth season of this garden, fifth. We've transformed it into an entirely native to Eastern North America native plant garden that is feeding all kinds of native pollinators, caterpillars, butterflies from May through the end of October. And I would love to invite anyone who's interested to visit this garden to get ideas and inspiration for their home landscape and learn more about native plant gardening. Here's some more pictures from this garden at the Spruces. You can take these kinds of plants and grow them in your home garden instead of grass. That's all I'll say for now about that. I felt a real connection with what I think Professor Junaid said about recognizing interspecies interdependence. we definitely need political change that Professor Edgerton was talking about. We need different kinds of urban design, as Professor Wang talked about. And if you're feeling despair, you can plant beautiful plants in your home garden that can help you feel like you're doing something positive. And even if you don't know the names of all the thousands of creatures living in your soil or the names of the 40 species of native bees, I'm not talking about honeybees, I'm talking about bumblebees and cellophane bees and sweat bees that are native to Massachusetts before the honeybees came. You can grow native plants and you will be benefiting an entire food web. I can talk about this for hours. I don't have hours, and I think we're running behind schedule already. So I invite you to email me via befriendlywilliamstown@gmail.com. Oh, here's my resource list. There are so many resources for people who want to do native plant gardening here in New England. I'm happy to share this and many other resources with anyone who'd like to be in contact with Be Friendly Williamstown. Do the best you can until you know better, but we know that we can do things differently in our home landscapes that will benefit other creatures besides humans. So keep learning about plants and pollinators. I had another slide that got left out where I invoked Ms. Frizzle, who's fictional, but some people might remember her. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, get messy, and plant some native plants while we are figuring out how to move away from plastics and change. I love that. I've been using the term Anthropocene for a long time, but we definitely need to find ways beyond the Capitalocene as well. So come over to the Spruces and we'll share seeds and plants, and we'll do a non-capitalistic model of gardening. Thank you. I brought some plants that I started in January in my study, which has a lot of natural light.
So I'll move it over to the question and answer portion. So all y'all on Zoom can enter it in through Slido. We've already had a few questions come in. So this one's for Laura. Laura, what are the first steps we can take to make our lawns and yards more sustainable?
Susanna Lerman gave us a talk here at MCLA last month, and it's available online via YouTube. And she's with the U.S. Forest Service, and she has done extensive research about how changing lawn mowing regimes is really beneficial to all kinds of bees and lawn-dwelling insects. So the super short answer is try to only mow once every 2 weeks, not try to mow only once every 2 weeks, not more often than that. I'll just stop there. And Susanna Lerman, and you guys had her here, and it was great. I wasn't able to come that night because of the snowstorm, but it's online, and it's a great talk. You can listen to her talk and be inspired while you're washing dishes or folding laundry or doing something. I really recommend it. But mow only once every 2 weeks. There's also a big article in the New York Times about no mow May. If you can skip mowing at all in the month of May. Dandelions are not native to North America, but the bees have figured out how to use them. And if you can let the dandelions bloom, it's really, really beneficial to the native insects.
A follow-up question for you, Laura. So if to collect good seeds, are the spruces where your pollinator garden is that a good place to collect seeds? Or if there are other places that you recommend to collect seeds from?
Well, if you really want to grow native plants, it's great to collect seed from plants growing in the wild in that region. But if you're collecting in the forest, You never ever want to take more than 10% of the seeds because there need to be seeds for the plant to regenerate itself in the forest. So it's great if you can collect them from a garden situation like the spruces, or there are increasingly people planting for pollinators who will have seeds in their home gardens. And if you can collect seeds from those people, that is super fantastic. We definitely have seeds to spare at the spruces. So watch our website, befriendlywilliamstown.org. And in October, there can definitely be days where people could come and collect seeds that then they could grow on their own in the future. If you're wild collecting, be really respectful, say thank you to the plant, and don't take more than 10% of what's there. Because remember, somebody else might be coming after you. So
I love it. Okay. I'll move it over to our next panel. It's on.
I forgot to say thank you like everybody else did. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Abby was amazing working with me, getting this together. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, big thanks to Abby for coordinating this and putting it together.
Our next panel is about art and praxis of climate change. And our three panelists are Liza Marsala, Tiffany Ferreira, and Professor Malinsky. First up is Liza Marsala, who is talking about writing about climate. And Liza is a junior in the English department with a concentration in creative writing and will be graduating with her bachelor's in 2023. She grew up in Connecticut and was homeschooled for her academic career. Liza began writing poetry and creative fiction at the beginning of high school and was a leader and member of the Stratford Library's Teen Writers Workshop for several years. At MCLA, she serves as the co-editor-in-chief of Spires, MCLA's literary magazine.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here. When I received an email asking me to present on the topic of writing about climate change or storytelling in climate change, after I got over being very flattered, I almost said no because I feel very underqualified to be next to people who do so much work and so much research. I wouldn't ever want to try to claim I'm any kind of authority on this subject. But at the same time, I think I'm a human being who's experiencing the same thing we're all experiencing. We all live here. And I think that's all you need to write, is to be a human being with experiences and perspective. I'm specifically going to be focusing on creative writing because obviously as a creative writing major, that's sort of my bread and butter. But also, I have a great deal of respect for people who write professionally and write textbooks and whatnot, but sometimes they can be a bit inaccessible. And I don't know anyone who's ever had an emotional connection with a textbook. I'm sure someone has, but I haven't. But even if you don't have that emotional connection with a textbook, you can get that information through a creative source. I, for one, poetry is like my thing. I like all sorts of fiction and creative writing, but I love poetry. A poem will stay with me for years and years and years. And I think something that we're talking about solutions, and I can't propose a solution for you for this massive problem we're all facing. But I think that something we need to get past, as previous presenters have mentioned, is that we need to have people to put pressure on these political powers that can give real solutions, that can make change. To have enough people to do that, we need to get past people who are denying the existence of climate change. You need to get past that armor. I'm sure we all have that family member at Christmas who says, "Oh, global warming, you mean summer." Like, you all know that person. That person's not going to sit down and read an article telling them why they're wrong. But that person might read a book. And through that emotional connection, it's not coming up. If I came up to any of you and I said, "I would like to talk about death," you're probably going to avoid that conversation. But if I say, here's a story about my grandmother and about how she passed away and the effect she had on me, I'm telling you a story about death. And we're having that connection. We're talking. You might read a beautiful poem about my grandmother. I've written some. We can write about these big topics very indirectly through a creative outlet. And that's really what I want to stress. And a lot of authors are doing that. This pretty much applies to any kind of activism to me. One author I'd really like to talk about is N.K. Jemisin. She is the author of the Broken Earth trilogy. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the 5th season. This is a fantasy novel. If I handed you this book and you started reading it, you would say this is a story about a woman desperately seeking her daughter in this amazing fantasy setting. And it is. But that story is also telling you about racial inequality, about climate change, about income inequality, and class structures, without sitting you down and lecturing at you, because you're seeing a person's experience. And that's like very real for us. So I would say you have to take that very specific lens and zoom in on that experience in order to get through to people and to get through to a lot of people. So you have to look at that problem. You may not be offering a solution, but you're saying, look at this problem that exists. That book is saying, look at what happens from one moment. Look at what happens when we discriminate against a group of people. Look at what happens when we don't educate people. A specific quote from Jemisin about this book is, what could we do if we educated everyone equally? What could we do if everyone had what they needed to survive? How would that affect climate change? What do we do when we are facing a potential end of the world? And that's a way to get past those people who are in denial, because if you just bring it up, they aren't going to hear you. But they might hear your writing. And that's just what I'd like to stress. I'd also like to say it's about asking questions. Like I said, what happens when we discriminate against a group of people? What happens when all of these species are dying? What happens when our world is heating up? And you're speculating. You might be speculatively answering those questions, or the writer that you're reading is speculatively answering those, but it's going to make you think about it, right? And you're going to keep thinking about it. And that thinking about it might be what makes you say, I'm going to start a garden this summer. You know, I'm going to talk to my uncle who won't stop saying, it's just summer. I'm going to try to do something. We also desperately need escapism. I think that's sometimes a dirty word when we talk about creative writing, but we need it. Everything is awful all of the time. Sometimes reading articles about climate change is so overwhelming, and so it feels so awful, and you're so scared, and you should be. But we can't, that's not sustainable for us as people. You can ask good questions too. You can speculate pleasantly. You can say, what happens if we have a world and we have a city where everything's greener? What happens if we do the things we need to do and people are listening to us? You can grant that safe place for people to escape while still promoting thought and still making this space. And I just want to stress so much that I think we're made to create, we're made to be creative, regardless of what your art is. There are other people on this panel who I have so much respect for who are going to be talking about other types of art, but my art is writing. And people get scared of creative writing, of writing of any kind. I'm not good at this, I'm not good enough, no one wants to hear what I have to say. And you have a story, so I'm going to very quickly tell you a story about something that happened in my freshman year. I believe it was my college writing 2 class, pre-COVID. It was Earth Day. And my professor, there was all sorts of events going on, things about recycling, et cetera, et cetera. My professor said, we're going to go sit outside and you're going to write and then you're going to read. And it's going to be on the quad and it's going to be broadcast for the whole campus. And we all said, no. No one in that class had any particular thoughts or strong feelings on climate change. All of us felt underqualified. And we sat down and our professor just made a quiet space for us and gave us slips of paper. And all of the slips of paper had a species of animal that either had already gone extinct or was going extinct, and said, write about this. And you had 20 creative people sitting outside and writing, and she said, now who wants to share their thoughts on this? And everyone raised their hand. So I'd just like to say how important it is to make that space for yourself and for others and to share. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. The next presenter is Tiffany Ferreira, and she's going to be talking about nature and art. Tiffany Ferreira is a visual artist that examines the natural world with mixed medias. She shares her individual lens on society and the environment through acrylic painting, drawing, collaging, and more. She is soon to be exhibited in the 2022 BAA College Fellowship Show, as well as previously taking part in the 2021 show. She's been featured on the MCLA Smart Commons blog as an artist highlight and on the web gallery. She has held various leadership positions as the design chair of Hoosick Hall Advisory Board and a resident area security monitor. Currently, Tiffany is a junior at MCLA studying art and arts management with a minor in art history.
I'll just pull up my PowerPoint. Okay. All right, can you see this?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about the way nature and art intertwine in my own work, as well as other ways artists take on this idea. So I consider myself a nature artist. To me, this means I create works that embody different aspects of nature or the environment through my own personal perspective. I tend to think of this as celebrating nature and its beauty. In these two pieces I have up, I wanted to focus on color and the movement in these depictions. In my Life's Moments Through Color project, I also wanted to focus on color because these are little paintings on like paint sample sheets that you get from Home Depot or Lowe's, but also how moments and memories get associated with the natural world. I started this project during the pandemic and not being able to necessarily go outside and experience quote unquote normal life again, and that was hard. So I wanted to take a step back and appreciate the different aspects of nature and all the ways that it inspires people. And this is the last body of work that I'll show of my own work, but this was based on and inspired by botanical illustrations. And this was also an appreciation to the amount of research and dedication to understanding different aspects of the natural world. With all of this said, this is the ways that I combine nature and art, and there's numerous ways that other artists continue to do this. I like to do this with focusing on my subject matter being centered around nature in all those different types of ways. I also would like to bring up another artist that I consider celebrating nature, and that is Vincent van Gogh. The majority of his work and his subject matters are nature and include nature, and he's even known for painting outside in the environment. Thinking more contemporary, Andy Goldsworthy is a great example. He is a sculptor, photographer, and environmentalist that opens the door to a more organic and intimate connection to nature. His site-specific works or installations call attention to our resources and how nature itself can be and is the art. The last artist that I'll talk about briefly is Zaria Foreman. She uses art as a call for activism, specifically with climate change and its effect on the icebergs and the Arctic waters. She creates these naturalistic pastel drawings that are massive and make you take a step back and think. I mean, in the picture on the left, you can see her starting to work on that corner. It's just a massive piece of work that really makes you take a step back. With all of this said, all of these artists combine nature and art in their own specific way, which I think shines light on the versatility of art and the creativity that people have. That the art can be more and do more for starting a conversation and calls for action, which I think is a good stopping point for Melanie.
Next up, we have Professor Malinsky, who is going to be talking about artists respond to climate. Melanie Malinsky lives and works in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, where she's a professor of art at MCLA. Malinsky holds an MFA from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia and an MAR from Yale University. Malinsky balances hyper-control and specific rules with experimental investigations in her letterpress and book artwork, often gravitating towards one-of-a-kind books housed in unusual and traditional enclosures. Her books, under the imprint press 29 Press, are in private and public collections, including Williams College, Yale University.
You don't need to read all of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In 2017, she completed the 50-card project, a year of the letterpress cards printed every week from Inauguration Day to the end of 2017. This project was directly inspired by the statement liberty and justice for all. She brings her commitment to civic engagement and collaborative projects, partnerships, and activities in her local, national, and international communities.
Great. Thank you. I will share my screen. And thank you for that introduction. Thank you for this wonderful evening. Really a big, I'm so excited to be part of this worldwide climate teach-in, and I'm delighted to share some work of artists who create artworks that use climate change data, who document changes to the earth because of climate change, who advocate and raise awareness. And it's really hard to choose which artists' work to share. As the earth has spiraled because of climate change, more and more artists are engaging with this subject. I want to thank Tiffany and is it Liza, who just spoke. I think Tiffany started to introduce you to art and nature, and I often begin a talk about climate change by looking at artists who work with nature. And Liza, just what you were saying about how writing and the arts really can speak to people who might not actually read the newspapers or think about climate, but they might be moved by seeing artwork. I'm going to begin by talking about one particular artist who works with the earth. I had a couple other ones, but I decided to eliminate them just as an essence of time. But this was my way into thinking about the earth and climate change. This is my friend Peter Adams. This is on in southern Tasmania. The next landmass is Antarctica, and I swear sometimes I felt like when I've been there, I could see Antarctica from his property. But here you see him planting trees. He purchased this land. It's called off of Roaring Beach in Tasmania, probably about 30 years ago, and it had been overgrazed, overforested. It was completely a mess. And he bought 100 acres and he started to plant trees. And the image on the left you can see are some of the early trees. The image on the right, you can see that same place where those trees that he planted, they're starting to grow. And that's, I think, probably about 10 or 15 years from the initial planting. And then this is a drone picture of the property. So pretty much everything, all those trees, all of that circle, that keyhole circle that you see there, he has planted every single one of those trees. And he did this intentionally. He did this to create, he's literally sculpting the land. Here's another example of what he's done. So every single thing that you see that is green right there, those are trees that he has planted. And this was his way of reclaiming the earth, of rehabilitating the earth out of all the ravages that have happened because of human interaction. There are other artists who do this, but I'm just going to leave it with that person. The next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about are artists who work with data. I love this artist. Her name is Jill Pelto. She is a painter and an environmental scientist. She lives in Maine, and at least she was going to school in Maine, and I'm not sure where she lives at this point. But over the past 7 years, she has accompanied her father, who's a glaciologist, to the North Cascades National Park to monitor glaciers. And she's also conducted research on other glaciers, and she's tracked that data. So if you can see my arrow, you're going to see here, these different dots are points of data on particular graphs. And this is going to be the temperature, the way that the temperature has changed and risen, and its impact on the glaciers. Here's another example. I'm not going to go into the details of the specific, all these different things, but you can see here, these are at the bottom, you can see the years, and this is showing how the glacier has been melting. Here's another one. So she's also looking at this one is called Increasing Forest Fire Activity. And some of these are based on data from NOAA's National Center for Environmental Information. But again, you can see her points here. She's using the data to kind of create that landscape. And this is the last one that I have of her work. And again, this is documenting the decline of glaciers. Abby will put into the chat a handout with all the websites of the artists that I'm speaking about today. This next piece is just something fun that I love. It's by this artist named Brian Fu, and it's the Climate Change coloring book. It contains guided coloring activities that explore scientific research and data related to climate change. The goal is to encourage learning, exploration, and reflection on issues related to climate change through the act of coloring, which I love. It just makes me super excited. Here's the cover of it. You can go to his website. I think it's pretty affordable as something, and it's just a fun thing to support his work, but then also to learn about climate change through this activity. The next artists that I'm going to look at are artists who are directly integrating climate change into their work. So the first artist is Christine Simpson. And these are a combination photographs and like kind of collage photograph painting pieces that she does. And she's looking at the contrast between what's going on below and above the water and how things are dying. I don't know too much about her work. This next artist, I was first introduced to his work I worked at the Berkshire Museum about almost 20 years ago. I can't believe that. But I was first introduced to his work at the Berkshire Museum. They had one of these paintings. These are massive. They probably, if I was there in Murdoch right now, it would stretch the width of that room and be about 7 feet high. They're huge. And so what he is doing, he is looking at these moments, kind of like thinking about going into the future and what the world might look like in the future. He's I believe he's a native New Yorker. He went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and when he was young, he spent a lot of time at the American Museum of Natural History, and that really started getting him interested into into the natural world and painting. And so here's another example. And so he's looking at what might Central Park look like if ice age came through, and then what would happen after that. Let me go back. This one is the one I think that was at the Berkshire Museum. And this is supposed to be the Brooklyn Bridge. So this is what is going to happen to the Brooklyn Bridge. And I think it is called, it's 3,000 years into the future. And he called it Manifest Destiny, which is loaded for a lot of different reasons. We could unpack this probably this entire time period, but we will move forward. This artist reminds me a lot of the last artist that Tiffany talked about, but these are photographs. So this is the work of Diane Tuft. She is a mixed media artist who mostly works in photography. She's very much interested in what is going on with the Arctic, within the Arctic, and what is melting there. She's been since 1998, she's been documenting the beauty of this, as well as the way that it's changing, and looking at how, looking at the role of ultraviolet light, looking at ozone depletion, and looking at how her photographs could capture a moment of time, a moment of infrared light, and a moment of ultraviolet. This artist, I feel really, really super lucky. I was able to see this piece. So this is Lorenzo Quinn's piece called Support. This was at the Venice Biennale in 2017, and he's literally supporting the walls of Venice. And I actually was also in Venice in 2019 for the Biennale. I left the day that they had the record flooding, the record tides. And this piece was directly in response to all of the flooding and all the tides that tide challenges that the city of Venice has had to deal with because of climate change. And he's since made various other versions of this. But one of the things that he wrote is that his hope is to bring a new focus of attention to the global calamity that we are all faced with. Venice is now the art capital of the world, but the city is a place that's threatened and needs our help and protection. Some of you may have heard that phrase, riskscapes, and a lot of these, Venice is a riskscape, Antarctica is a riskscape, Iceland is a riskscape. These are these places that are not only being ravaged by climate change, but they're also being ravaged by over-tourism and the Disneyland kind of way that we have set up certain parts of the world. This is the work of Courtney Madison. She hand sculpts intricately detailed ceramic sculptural works that are inspired by the fragile beauty of ocean ecosystems, mostly coral reefs. If any of you've seen various photographs of the way that the reefs have changed, you can kind of see that this is what she's trying to depict. Over here on the left is really a vibrant coral reef. And then as we look here where we're losing all the color and where it's kind of bleached and brown, that is unfortunately what a lot of coral reefs are evolving into. And one thing about her, just as a nod, she went to Skidmore College, just a little ways from us. And I just love the detail and the intricacy. And it's one of these things, right? Like I talk to my students a lot that if we just saw this image, for example, at first, we might be moved by it. But then as we start to read a little bit more about her work, we understand that the reason why all of this is white on the edges is that it's in response to the bleaching that is happening of these coral reefs. And so she's, in many ways, I think artists bring us into their work through the beauty of what they're doing. And then as we start to look and really see the details of what they're making, we start to, that will lead us, I would hope, to looking at their artist statement, and then that might then lead to action. The I forgot this next artist. I love this artist. His name is Sean Yoro, and he is a Hawaiian, and most of his youth he spent surfing, but then he discovered graffiti and tattoo art, and he decided to figure out ways to create these semi-submerged murals. So he's kind of bringing his love of graffiti and surfing together to find places like abandoned docks, old shipwrecks, forgotten walls, and placing, especially like underneath bridges, as the one in the lower right corner. It's really super exciting to see how he is doing that. And I have one more artist. I'm not sure where I am as far as time goes. My last artist, you might look, these might look really familiar if you, right? You may have seen something like this, but you have to look a little bit closer. What is going on, right? If we look at this, so on the left is maybe what you might have seen as a traditional one of these sort of early 20th century national park posters, but look on the right, you're going to see that you can visit the extinct pika, the dead whitebark pines, the old climate discovery center, that the features are going to be the Wizard Island algae bloom, a disappearing snowpack, dry lake bed, devil's backbone, pine beetle infestations. Really exciting, right? Look at what's happened to Crater Lake National Park. And then look at this one, the redwoods. Look at the picture on the left. Look at the picture on the right. I mean, like when this is Hannah Rothstein's. When she was making these paintings, this was before that tragic fire that happened. I think it was last year, where so many redwoods were lost. But this is really, I mean, it's kind of scary and eerie how this is happening, and I think a lot of artists maybe use a little bit of shock factor, a little bit of making people uncomfortable. Is that my time?
Yeah,
yeah. Thanks. Here are the last few ones. Please take a look at my handout. Yeah. Great. Thank you, everybody.
So I'm going to start the Q&A session right now. And for Tiffany, the question is, what is the goal that you have in your mind when you create your work?
That's a hard question. I think there's a lot that encompass what my goals are and what inspires me. I think the main thing is to highlight its beauty and kind of how I live and experience it in my daily life.
My next question is for Liza. And it's, do you think that writing can be a helpful outlet for people struggling with the climate emotions? If so, why?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you're struggling with any emotions, writing is a fantastic way to just get it out, especially if you feel like you don't have a vocal outlet. Because writing is so personal, you can organize all your thoughts. And if you so choose, you can lock it in a drawer somewhere and never open it again. I know I have a journal that I keep that says, do not all over it. Like, just leave it alone. And just having that out of your head can be, I think, such an intense relief. So I would say absolutely yes.
And the last question is for Melanie, is what impact can these artists have on the way we view climate issues?
What impact have the artists had on the way we view climate issues, like sort of the general we?
I believe so.
Okay. That's a really great question. I can't necessarily speak for the general we. I know that I can speak for myself, that when I see work like this, I have, I think, two feelings. One is it inspires me to want to make more work like it, or to think about the earth and how I can use climate change as a way of inspiring the work that I make. I think it also inspires me to want to share that work with other people, because I do feel a lot like what Liza was saying, that there's a way to influence people through writing, reading, and the arts that it can maybe be a little subversive, like that that painting of the Brooklyn Bridge by Alexis Rockman, imagining what New York City could look like after climate change. I think it's hard to imagine that, but I think his painting really helps us start to imagine it. And I think, with Jill Pelto's work, seeing that data, it visualize. I think sometimes a lot of people need that visualization to help move them to action.
Thank you. And thank you for all the presenters. And be moving on to the next panel now. And our next moderator is Sean.
Hello, my name is Sean Murphy. This last panel is called Life Saves the Planet. We have three panelists. We have Alicia Alter, we have Justin Golub, who I believe is online, and Eric Doucet. We'll begin with Alicia. Alicia is originally from New Hampshire and went to college in Amherst, Massachusetts, and chose to move to Massachusetts permanently after getting a job at the MCLA library in 2017. Alicia enjoys exploring nature and hiking with their wife, Becca. This first panel is called Seed Saving. So come on up.
All right, thanks for that introduction. So I'm just pretty much going to talk about windowsill gardening and seed saving, like stuff that I've learned over the past couple years. Some of the stuff that I've learned over the past couple years about that. This is my windowsill garden. So we've got a clementine, sorter clementine with some scallions and carrots in it, clementine, like a larger one, parsley and onion, and some field garlic. So the taller clementine is grown from one seed, and the shorter clementine is grown from 3 seeds. So it's 3 separate plants in there. I saved these seeds from some clementines I brought from the store. I removed them from the clementines and dried them for a while, maybe a few weeks or so, just to make sure they were completely dry. Looking back in my plant journal, I may have peeled away the outer shell of the seed, leaving the actual seed kernel exposed. So you can see that on the right-hand side. I planted them on February 17th, 2020, and to my surprise, they sprouted. It took about a month for them to sprout. For 2 years, they have been growing very well in my window that faces southeast. The taller one grew about 10 inches in the last couple months. They seem to have growth spurts from December to March. I only recorded the growth spurt this year. All the growth that they've done has been inside by the window. This summer, I may bring them outside to give them a boost of growth. The taller one is a little wobbly, so a summer spent in the wind and rain may strengthen it. The taller one has some bark forming, which you can see in this picture. And so on March 2nd, I planted another clementine seed at my desk at work, and I'm going to do an experiment to see if it'll grow in some fluorescent light. I'm not really sure what will happen. It hasn't sprouted yet, though. So the next picture shows 2 scallions that I'm growing in the smaller clementine pot. On February 22nd, 2022, I planted the root ends of 2 scallions. I left about 1 inch of the white part of the scallion plus its roots. The image on the left is from Pinterest, but it represents what I did with my scallions. You can plant them in water and let them grow, but I decided to plant them in soil. I've tried putting them in water before, and they can get moldy if you don't remember to change the water often, which I have trouble remembering to do. So I decided to put mine in soil. I'll probably let them grow for a few more weeks, and I'll start trimming off the scallions. I did something similar with carrots. I got them from the store. I cut off the top inch or so of the carrot and planted it in soil a few weeks ago. The carrot picture, the carrot top is not mine, but it represents what I did with my plant. And I'll probably let these grow for another month or so before I harvest the leaves and add them to salads. Or if I have enough, maybe make some pesto with some parsley that I also grew on the windowsill. So a couple of weeks ago, I noticed an onion was starting to sprout in my cabinet. So I planted it in soil on March 9th. This is pretty much how much it's grown since March 9th. The picture of the sprouted onion on the right is another one that sprouted after the first. I may plant this one as well. So I could have just eaten both of the sprouted onions, but I thought, why not add more green and life to my life? Also, green onions are really easy to cook food with. You actually don't have to cook them. You can just add them to any dish, uncooked. So I planted this parsley plant from seed over the summer, and over the winter I brought it inside, and I've kept it at the windowsill the whole time. I've harvested it from it a few times, made pesto once over the winter, and my cat also likes to rub her face on it and kind of hide behind it and spy on the animals outside. There was a kind of mildew growing on the lower leaves about a month ago, but I just kind of cut them off, and it's still doing fine. I'm hoping to bring this plant back outside and at some point stop cutting leaves from it and let it grow. And hopefully it'll flower, and after the flowers fall away, a seed pod will be left in its place. And then I would probably let the seed pod dry and take out some seeds to plant it again. So lately I've been learning how to forage and identify wild edible plants. One of them is field garlic. So you can normally find it in the late winter or early spring. It kind of looks like clumps of grass at first, which is on the left side or the right side. But if you look closely, you'll see the blades are completely round. And when you pick off a blade and rub it between your fingers, it has like a garlic smell. And I found field garlic in my own backyard, actually. This picture on the right is what's growing now. Last fall, I removed some from outside and put it in this container. And it was pretty much dormant over the winter and started growing again in February. And the leaves or the blades growing above the ground supply energy to like small bulbs growing under the ground. And the bulbs resemble miniature garlic. I don't have a picture of those, unfortunately, though. So now I'm going to tell a couple stories about seed saving. These are tomatillo fruits. So in 2020, my mom and I went to a farmer's market and bought some tomatillo plants. I think I tried to grow only one plant, but I didn't get any fruits, so I'm not really sure why. My mom grew about 5 plants and got a lot of fruits. I went to her house and took some of her tomatillos. She had so many that she washed and froze them whole in big Ziploc bags. I kept a few of the unfrozen ones and dried them whole. In summer 2021, I planted 2 whole dried tomatillos in 2 pots of vermicompost that I made. The heat and the vermicompost provided good conditions, and both tomatillos sprouted. In the late summer, I brought the 2 tomatillo plants to the library, and by then they were about 2 feet tall. We had just received 2 outdoor raised beds, and I planted them in there. In mid-fall, the plants were about 3 feet tall and started to flower. I was nervous that the plants would freeze before they produced fruit, so I tried an experiment. I dug them out of the outdoor raised beds, put them in buckets, and brought them to the greenhouse, at the CSI greenhouse. And they continued to flower, and to my surprise, they stayed alive and produced a lot of fruits. And on December 10th, I harvested about 30 tomatillos, which is in this picture. This is in the fridge at the library, actually. And I shared some of them with the library staff and myself. I took some home. And I saved 1 tomatillo from this harvest, and I dried it, and I'm drying it currently, hoping to plant it again. That's one that I'm drying from that December harvest. So this story, or these tomatillos, really make me feel connected to my mom through the generations of tomatillo plants. And I've been able to keep my tomatillo gardening sustainable by saving the seeds. I tried a similar method of like drying fruit and seeds together with strawberry. That's a strawberry slice there. I planted this dried fruit with the seeds attached in the winter, but perhaps due to the cold and the still present plant material, it kind of molded and didn't really sprout. So that guess it doesn't always work. I'll probably pick out the seeds next time before I plant them in. So one more story about seed saving. Gotcha. In the fall 2019, the growing season was winding down, and I still had a kale plant growing in my garden. Honestly, I was a bit lazy, so I decided to cover the plant up with leaves in hopes that maybe it would compost and decay in place, and I could plant something else there in the spring. Spring came along, and to my surprise, new kale leaves began growing on the old plant. It turns out the kale plant was hibernating, waiting for spring so it could continue its life cycle. I had the privilege of eating some fresh kale in early April, and later in the summer, the plant began to grow a tall stalk with flowers. I looked into this online and learned that it was in its second year of life and was going to produce seeds. After the flowers died back, a thin green seed pod formed. I let them dry and turn brown and collected the small black seeds in a paper bag. This is like seeds that came from one kale plant. It was probably hundreds. I've been continuing to grow kale in this spot for the past 2 summers. I may never have to buy kale or kale seeds again. So in conclusion, I've kind of tried to illustrate how I've learned to grow plants, mostly by accident and by experiments and by mistakes. I think anyone can learn how to grow plants, but you can always be prepared for failure, but also accidental joys. It helps to keep a journal. I've been keeping a journal of my home gardening for about 3 years. This is a page from my journal. But I haven't written everything down. It's kind of easy as life gets going. That's kind of hard to remember to document everything. So a lot of my experiments in plant updates weren't recorded, but a lot of them were. And it's worth looking back on what did and didn't work. It's easy to feel like I haven't really learned much because I keep kind of failing sometimes, but it's looking back at the journal, I have learned something. And I still have a lot more to learn and a lot more experiments to try. So yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you very much, Alicia. Up next, we have animals and fungi, or fungi, if you are so inclined. That's going to be hosted by Professor Golub, and that'll be online, so we'll see if we can get that set up.
Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Excellent, and you can hear me. Great.
Yes.
All right. So you ready for me to start?
Yes, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. So I was, thank you to all the organizers for this and all the other presenters. And you may have just seen my cat walk across the screen. I was asked to present on animal and fungi, which I kept trying to ask for clarification because these are some very large groups of organisms. So I'm going to try to kind of give you a quick introduction to animal and fungi and sort of changes to the environment that involve them and involve us and how they affect them. Okay. So first, just an introduction to the concept of biomes and how we think about the environment. So this pyramid here is shown. Yep.
Sorry, Justin, you've got your security window showing on the screen for your Mac.
All right, thanks. There. That better?
Yeah, looks good.
Thanks. So this is showing the different biomes that exist, showing increasing dryness, but also increasing temperature. So in colder climates, which we can also see up here, you have things like tundra and Arctic biomes. Then the boreal forests are in that dark green, and then the temperate forests, grasslands, deserts. And then you get into the warmer climates where you've got tropical forests, rainforests, and even some more tropical grasslands. Throughout each of these biomes, we see ecosystems or environmental conditions where you have subsets of organisms that thrive in these areas and create these communities of organisms that interact with each other. The only biomes that we're not showing on here are the aquatic ones, which, when you think about it, are actually the largest biomes. So that's why I put a nice little picture of a reef, which is just one of the many aquatic biomes that exists. So as I mentioned, within each biome, you have these communities of organisms. Within those communities, we see what are called trophic levels, so groupings of organisms. Right. First, we have our primary producers. These are the ones that use energy from the environment, such as thermal energy or the sun, solar energy, to produce chemical energy that can be used by other organisms, such as the primary consumers, things that are obligate herbivores and will eat all the different plant matter. And you may notice that this base of the pyramid is much wider than the next layer up, the next trophic level, because to support the animals that exist here, you need that much more plant matter. It's usually about 10-fold more plant matter than you have animals at that level. And then above, you have the secondary consumers. These eat primary consumers, and then usually a tertiary consumer or a top predator that will eat everything lower down. And then at the base, and this is actually the largest part of the entire trophic tree or trophic pyramid, is the group of decomposers. So these are the things that will eat every other level. They eat primary producers, the consumers, and then the secondary consumers as well. They are responsible for breaking down dead matter. So typically they will consume things that have already died. They are scavengers by definition. And when we think about it, our autotrophs are the ones that are producing the energy, but everything else is eating something else. So when we think about fungi, right, most people don't think about the diversity of fungi, but when we look at them, fungi are actually quite unique in that they form these huge networks of hyphae, of cells that interconnect with each other to share nutrients and share information. And the only part we typically see are these fruiting bodies up top. Mushrooms, puffballs, right? All the parts that we see are reproductive structures that exist representing lots and lots of hidden fungi cells and the fungi organism. And they're responsible for a lot of different symbiotic relationships with animals, plants, bacteria, pretty much across the entire kingdom or the entire domain of living organisms. We see fungi can have symbiotic relationships. One that we actually see quite frequently are mycorrhizal fungi that will fix nitrogen from decaying matter and actually create a network of hyphae to the roots of trees to share that nitrogen with those trees, which provides a source of nitrogen. We also have fungi that are predatory. So here is a roundworm. These are a couple millimeters in length. And here are some hyphae that actually form these snares and encapsulate or capture those roundworms, inject them with enzymes, and then suck out all the nutrients from them. Obviously, when there's not a source of food, this is a method of gaining nutrition. So when we think about organisms, we're thinking about the interaction, and we create these food webs, right? So things that consume other things, right, can be consumed by each other. Ultimately, what we're thinking about here is energy has to come in, gets used by autotrophs, right? Minerals can also come in for this. It then enters into the biome, into the organization of biological organisms, where it gets consumed by herbivores, which are consumed by carnivores. Everything is consumed by the decomposers, which then release those minerals and nutrients back to be used by autotrophs again. So now we can start thinking about these food webs and what goes on within a food web. So here is an example food web. Here's the sun, here's your primary producers, here are your primary consumers, and then your secondary consumers, and then your top predatory consumers. And what's happened in this particular system, and here are your decomposers. What's happened in this system is one of the consumers, the sea otter, has actually been removed. And I'll come back to why it's been removed or what's happened to remove it. But in a normal, healthy system, when those sea otters are present, they are consuming sea urchins, which keeps the sea urchins from over-consuming the kelp forests. When sea otters are gone, they're not consuming the urchins bloom, they overpopulate, and then they decimate those kelp forests. So what's causing this is an introduction of a predator. So orcas, which naturally are found in the same areas as sea otters, have been driven to start consuming these otters, changing their behavior, because their normal food sources, different types of fish, what's labeled here as large fish, are becoming less abundant. And as a result, they have to start to forage on other sources of food, which include sea otters. They're very smart animals, right? They're related to dolphins, which are another group of very smart animals. And they're able to learn to recognize a new food source, but also teach their young how to forage on that food source. So this is creating large problems in a variety of different areas that we need to start to think about how we address and how we can correct them. Right. Some of the other problems we see are things like habitat destruction and fragmentation. Right. So here are some fragmented forest habitats. They're now surrounded by farmland. Here's a habitat that was fragmented by a highway, major highway, and they've built this land bridge. You can actually see I think it's a deer crossing this land bridge. So it's able to move across this fragmentation line a little more successfully. This example here is just showing the effects of carbon dioxide in the environment. Increasing carbon dioxide leads to increasing, and you don't need to know all the chemistry here, but you get the formation of carbonic acid, which is, as Melanie was talking about with the coral bleaching, this is the effect that causes that bleaching, and it has other wide-ranging effects, including changing the behavior of organisms that are now used to use chemical signals in the environment, can no longer use them because the acid actually damages the cells. Environmental manipulation is another thing I wanted to just mention, right? So beavers are known to manipulate their environment for to build homes, but also to capture food. They are number 2 to us. So we are the most effective at manipulating our environment, followed by beavers. And just to illustrate the point, this is Back Bay in Boston. You can see the previous land in dark green. Light green is land that we have created in the bay. And then the blue is the current water line. So as you can see, a lot of Back Bay is land that we've created. And with that, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me to present. And sorry it was quick, but I hope you got something out of it.
Thank you very much, Professor. Apologies, I didn't do this beforehand, but I'll provide a little bit of information about him. He's an associate professor of biology at MCLA. His research interests lie in the ecology and evolution of learned predator behavior, recognition and avoidance, and the relationship between morphology and behavior. He earned his PhD from Clark University back in 2013. Now, up next, we have forest ecology with Professor Doucette. Eric Doucette is an associate professor of biology at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, where he teaches botany, ecology, and entomology. Eric earned both his undergraduate and graduate degrees at the University of Maine. And prior to working at the college, he was a biological consultant in Maine, working on natural community assessments and rare species surveys. He still does a lot of work like this on a volunteer basis for land trusts. And Professor Doucette, if you'd like to come up, then we can get started.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is way down here.
How's everyone doing?
So I usually get up at 4, so we're about a half hour past my bedtime, so it's pretty late. So I want to just talk about something that we can do as an action item to sort of mitigate climate change, is the effect of it. And it deals with something that we currently do already, which is gardening, which has been talked about already tonight. So here is the prediction for Massachusetts, 100 years out or so. And if you take the mean value, it's much, much higher than it currently is. So that black trend line is the current temp, and so we're predicted to go much beyond that. This is pretty standard graphics for almost all of the New England states. Publicly accessible data. Interesting but scary. There are lots of papers out there that look at predicted climate change and its effect on forest biomes and forest composition, what species will be growing here in the future. I should say they don't agree. So there's lots of methodological differences and differences in data interpretation. But I just picked one as just sort of a seminal paper to show you some general ideas here. This paper looked at predicted broad changes in 3 community types in New England, which already exist here: the oak hickory forest, the northern hardwood forest, and the boreal forest. And the big prediction, as you can see here, is that we're going to have some major percentage changes in the oak hickory forest, which is very poorly represented in northern New England. There's a fair amount of it here in Mass, but it's very rare in my home state of Maine, for instance. And one of the predictions in the future is that's going to change. So the take home here, this is current cover type. And so everything that is green is conifer dominated, and the gray is the oak hickory forest. Mixed forest, they're calling it here. But it is predominantly an oak and hickory forest cover type. 2 broad changes are predicted. So one, if you look at the mean of, I think it's 11 climate variables in some, then this is a predicted change of forest cover in that time. So obviously, if you look at the now versus one potential future, there's a lot of forest change in 100 years or so. Predicted forest change. There is one scenario where even under increased carbon dioxide, that there is what they're calling the boreal persistence model, where we won't have complete disappearance of boreal forests, but that's still, if you look at the green in these images, compared to the green here, we get a shift in density going to northwestern Maine, but overall still a decline in cover type. And a pretty famous graphic, which you may have seen by now, is one prediction is that by 2100, the climate of northern New England, and using New Hampshire as the exemplar here, will be like the climate of central North Carolina. So that's basically right around Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So it's not the high elevation portions of the state. And one sobering part to me is this graphic over here. When I was a kid growing up in Maine, every summer there was like 2 days that were unbearably humid. Now there's about 20 in that part of the state. So I'm from down East Maine, and I don't like this oppressiveness for 30 days or so in the summertime. Most people don't. It's been recognized, though, along with that potential change, that the corridor of the eastern deciduous forest that exists, this large forested swath, may have the potential to mitigate some of these climate changes. The presumption being that these forest types can just move upslope. That's a big presumption. And we know from past data that the pattern has not existed in the past. So there have been major changes to the landscape all around us, glaciation. After the last glacier, this species, for example, this is American beech, which is a dominant forest tree in much of New England. In my part of New England, where I'm from, it's only been there for about 5,000 years. So it took, from the last glaciation, all that time to work its way back and become a dominant. And so that's one of the biggest weaknesses of many of these models, is that they presume quick movement of tree species, which probably won't happen without assistance. So one of the things that I was thinking that we can do with this, and I'm starting to kind of experiment with this on land that I still own in Maine, is we can expect species to shift northward, but the rate again is probably not going to keep up with predicted climate change. So we could help them. So we can use our current gardening efforts to just plant species that may have the potential to be pre-adapted to more northern climates given the climate change. And so I've been doing that here with species that are more southerly in their range, but in all cases, they're wide-ranging species. So I'm taking genotypes that are from southern New England and transplanting them into south central Maine. And some of those are species in red here that don't currently occur in that state, but will be expected to given climate change. I should say this approach is not without controversy. There's some other people doing this as well, but if you're interested in the controversy, come see me. The other thing that we can do along with this is just make sure that we're maximizing genetic diversity. So this messy graphic is, because PowerPoint doesn't have nice straight little lines on it, this represents the idea that if we can gather seeds from multiple populations throughout the landscape, so we can transplant all those multiple genotypes into one new source population, one destination population, to maximize future potential adaptation. Because if we all collect seeds from just one location and transplant that to some other location hundreds of miles away, we're limiting the future potential genetically of those species. The other big thing we can stop doing as gardeners is stop planting cultivars. So when you go to nurseries or garden stores, a lot of the plants that are sold, they have names on them, and those names are in single quotes. Those are cultivated varieties. And in almost all cases, they're essentially clones. So they have very little diversity. So if we can collect seed, like some of you have talked about, and plant those diverse seeds in the landscape, that will mitigate that effect and keep genetic diversity. Okay, that's rapid fire, but I wanted to stay within 5 minutes, so I think I might have done it. Thanks a lot. And if you want to follow up with anything, just shoot me an email. Abby, thanks for doing all this.
All right, I wanted to thank these panelists as well as all panelists that went before. We are now going to open it up for some questions. Up first, I have a question for Alicia. Someone asks, do you have any tips for people who want to start doing windowsill gardening?
I don't know. I would just kind of go for it and see what happens. Like, that's kind of what I've been doing. I would start with maybe some of the things I talked about. Parsley seems to grow well. Onion, garlic, that type of thing. But I think you should just go ahead and experiment with whatever thing you want to try. And if it doesn't work, don't be disappointed because you can always try again. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Up next, for Professor Golub, where was the bay that you had up on the last slide?
That was Back Bay in Boston.
All right. And now, last question for Professor Doucette. What is the biggest misconception, I believe, about trees in our cities?
Trees in our cities. Well, the biggest misconception probably is the fact that we have to only plant non-native trees, because the trees that are most planted in the cities are what's commercially available because they're cheap and they're tough. They tend to be non-native. So if we have that switch to planting natives and choose that, then we can also, what I was talking about, we can have that stepping stone effect of natural migration. So get rid of the non-natives.
All right then, thank you. Looks like we do have one more. This, I believe, is going to be for Professor Golub. Do you know much about fungi being used to clean oil spills or other hazardous wastes?
I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that that is something that is being explored as a process for cleaning up some of our environmental catastrophes and other damage. So fungi and bacteria that are being used to clean up oil spills, so break down petroleum, can also be used to break down plastics. And then there are ones that I believe can be used to break down nuclear waste. Not quite sure exactly how they do it, since nuclear waste is known to be mutagen and can damage the DNA, but they still can break down that material.
All right. Thank you very much. That is all the questions that we have. Abby, do you want to come up? Any closing remarks?
So thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of the participants, speakers, moderators, audience members for attending this event. We do have a video, as you can, well, I'll share the screen in a little bit. We have a video that we're going to show from the Worldwide Teach-In, just like the introduction video that kind of summarizes this event. But before we show that video, I just want to really genuinely thank all of you for your participation. Thank you for your time, your energy, and your commitment to stabilizing climate and creating a better future for all people and all living beings on this planet. I think all of the presentations from this evening demonstrate that we can create positive change and we can address climate change from a wide variety of pathways, whether it be regenerative and windowsill gardening or creating healthy forest ecosystems, adopting solar energy, creating informative, emotive art and writing and literature, or engaging in activism for justice. One of my favorite quotes by Dr. Jane Goodall, who's a primatologist, is every individual matters, every individual has a role to play, and every individual makes a difference. You just have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. And I think that's really appropriate for this teach-in. I think you've all taught us that there are so many options for creating positive change in this world, and we just have to decide where we're going to start in our corner of the world. Together, we really can create positive change for climate. And this event has, at least for me, created a wholly remarkable and significant reason for hope for climate. So thank you. I am going to go back here to switch back to the screen share, and then I will play this presentation.
At your teach-in, you've discussed concrete actions you can move forward in your community. Time is short for climate injustice. Help others move from climate despair to climate action. As the young people say, now, not next month, not next year. Let's commit today, together, to create a just and sustainable future for people and planet.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
Obrigada a todos por se tornarem líderes em clima e justiça.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
जलवायु और न्याय पर वर्ल्डवाइड टीचिंग में आप सभी का स्वागत है।
Also, they asked me not to do this originally, but I'm going to do it anyway. Jill Anderson in the orange-pink salmon shirt and Starly Donati in the back corner were both key players in creating this event. They've been working with me since January, meeting every single week and putting in a lot of time and effort to making this happen, even coming here 2 hours early to help make sure everything was set up properly. So I think they deserve a huge round of applause.